Have you ever sat at a family dinner and realized every smile around the table was fake? I did. The night my father died, my brother raised a glass and called me the family's biggest failure. Everyone laughed. My sister whispered that I had spent my whole life cleaning floors because I wasn't smart enough to do anything else. Even my aunt looked at me with pity. None of them knew the truth. They thought I was just a broke janitor who barely survived paycheck to paycheck. They had no idea I'd spent the last 6 years secretly taking care of our father while they fought over the fortune they believed was already theirs. They mocked my old pickup truck. They laughed at my secondhand clothes. They even argued about who would let me sleep in their garage after the funeral because they assumed I'd soon be homeless. What happened 48 hours later destroyed every lie they'd built their lives on. Because when the lawyer opened my father's final will, every face in that room turned white, and for the first time in my life, they needed me far more than I would ever need them. I'm Ethan, 68 years old, and this is the story of how my own family tried to erase me, only to discover that kindness is sometimes worth far more than millions of dollars. For the first few weeks, Daniel was just another familiar face at the hospital. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he visited his 8-year-old nephew, Mason. Unlike most visitors, he never rushed through the room. He played board games, helped the nurses, even stayed behind to clean up after everyone left. One afternoon, I jokingly asked, "Do you secretly work here?" He laughed. "No, but hospitals have a way of reminding you what really matters." That answer stayed with me. We started talking during my lunch breaks, then after my shifts, then over coffee. Unlike Ryan, Daniel never interrupted me. He listened, really listened. When I talked about difficult days at the hospital, he asked how I was feeling, not how much overtime I was making. When I mentioned my dream of opening a children's health foundation one day, he didn't laugh. He asked, "How can I help make that happen?" It was such a simple question, but nobody had ever asked me that before. 3 months later, he finally asked me to dinner. "I know this isn't exactly romantic," he smiled, "but the best taco truck in Seattle closes in 20 minutes. I laughed. "Lead the way." That night cost less than $40. It became one of my favorite memories, because happiness isn't measured by the restaurant. It's measured by the person sitting across from you. Over the next year, Daniel became my best friend, then my partner, then the safest place I'd ever known. He never tried to impress me. He never bragged. Whenever I asked about work, he'd simply smile. "I run a small software company." That was IT.no. Fancy titles. No expensive stories, just quiet confidence. One evening we were walking along the waterfront when my phone buzzed. A message from an old college friend. "Did you hear? Ryan's wife is hosting the biggest charity gala in the city next month." I'd smile every time. My life didn't stop, Dad. I'm exactly where I want to be. One cold November evening, he grabbed my hand tighter than usual. "Ethan." "Yeah?" "Promise me something. Anything. When I'm gone, don't let bitterness become your inheritance." I laughed softly. "I don't hate them." He looked at me with tired eyes. "I know." Then he smiled. "That's why you're the richest person in this family." At the time, I thought he meant my heart. I had no idea he meant something else entirely. The morning my father passed away, the farmhouse was silent. For 6 years, every day had started the same way. I'd make coffee, check his medication, help him to the porch, and we'd watch the sunrise together. That morning, there was only an empty chair. The funeral was held 3 days later. I stood quietly beside Dad's casket, greeting the people who had actually known him, old neighbors, former coworkers, veterans he had served with decades ago. They all hugged me. "I don't know what your father would have done without you, Ethan. You gave him 6 beautiful years. You're a good son." Those words meant more than they could ever imagine. Then my family arrived. Daniel stepped out of a brand new black Mercedes wearing a designer suit that probably cost more than my monthly paycheck. Rebecca arrived moments later, carrying an expensive handbag and sunglasses. Even though the sky was gray, the first thing Daniel asked wasn't about DAD. It wasn't about the funeral. It wasn't even about me. "So, when does the lawyer read the will?" I stared at him. "Our father isn't even buried yet." He shrugged. "I'm just asking." Rebecca leaned closer and whispered with a laugh, I hope Dad finally sold this old dump before he died. I looked back at the farmhouse. The porch swing Dad loved, the apple tree Mom planted 40 years ago. The garden we'd worked on together every spring.to them. It was just property.to me. It was home. After the service, everyone gathered in the church hall. People shared stories about Dad, his kindness, his humor, the way he helped strangers without expecting anything in return. Daniel barely listened. Instead, he walked around asking distant relatives if they knew how much the farm was worth. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Then came the moment I'll never forget. One of Dad's old army friends walked over to me. He placed a weathered hand on my shoulder. Your father told me you never left his side. I just did what any son should. The old man smiled. No. He shook his head. You did what his children should have done. Daniel overheard every word. He laughed loudly enough for half the room to hear. Oh, come on. Ethan lived here because he couldn't afford rent anywhere else. A few uncomfortable chuckles echoed across the room. My face burned. It wasn't true. I'd given up my apartment because Dad needed someone, but before I could speak, Rebecca joined in. Honestly, Ethan has always been good at one thing. People looked at her. Cleaning. She smiled. I guess changing diapers for old people wasn't much of a career upgrade. This time, nobody laughed. The room became painfully quiet. Even strangers looked embarrassed. I wanted to walk away instead. I remembered Dad's last words. Don't let bitterness become your inheritance. I simply picked up a stack of empty coffee cups and carried them to the trash. Daniel smirked. See? He just can't stop cleaning. More laughter. I said nothing because dignity doesn't always answer insults, sometimes. It simply waits. That evening, after everyone had left, I returned to the farmhouse alone. The house felt empty. Dad's reading glasses were still on the kitchen table. His favorite sweater still hung beside the door. I sat on the porch until sunset. Then I noticed something unusual. An envelope had been tucked beneath Dad's old rocking chair. My name was written across the front in his unmistakable handwriting. For Ethan. Open only after the funeral. My hands began to shake. Inside was a short letter. My dear son, if you're reading this, I'm finally with your mother. First, thank you. You gave me 6 years that no amount of money could ever buy. The others will soon learn something they never understood, that love cannot be measured in dollars. When Mr. Harrison calls tomorrow morning, go to his office alone. Don't tell Daniel or Rebecca. Everything will make sense then. I'm proud of you, Dad. I read the letter 3 times. Mr. Harrison, Dad's attorney. Why would he want to see me before the official reading of the will? I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my jacket. For the first time since Dad passed away, I felt that he still had one final lesson left to teach us all, and I had no idea that within 24 hours, my family's entire world would collapse. The next morning, I barely slept. Dad's letter sat on the kitchen table beside a cold cup of coffee. At exactly 9 a.m., my phone rang. Mr. Ethan Carter. Speaking. This is Richard Harrison, Dad's attorney. I believe your father asked you to meet me before today's family appointment. My heart skipped. Yes, he did. I'll be waiting. Harrison and Cole had been the town's oldest law firm for over 50 years. When I arrived, Mr. Harrison himself greeted me at the door. He wasn't smiling. He looked emotional. He shook my hand with both of his. Ethan, your father talked about you every single time he visited. I lowered my eyes. I miss him. So do I. He led me into his office and locked the door. Then he opened a thick brown file. Before saying another word, he placed a small wooden box on the desk. I believe this belongs to you. I recognized it instantly. It was Mom's jewelry box. I hadn't seen it in 20 years. Inside, there were no diamonds. No expensive jewelry, only photographs. Pictures of birthdays, fishing trips, Christmas mornings, and one folded piece of paper. Dad's handwriting. The richest man isn't the one who owns the most. He's the one whose children still visit when there's nothing left to inherit. A lump formed in my throat. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. Ethan, I need to tell you something your father kept secret. He slid another folder toward me. Inside were years of financial records, property deeds, Bank statements, investment reports, none of it made sense. I don't understand. Mr. Harrison leaned forward. Your brother and sister believed your father was nearly broke. I nodded. They said medical bills drained everything. They believed exactly what your father wanted them to believe. I frowned. What do you mean? He opened another document. 6 years ago, your father quietly sold his manufacturing company. I stared at him. What? For $28 million. I couldn't breathe. Dad, a millionaire? No, much more than that. After taxes and investments, his estate had continued growing. Neither Daniel nor Rebecca knew, because Dad never changed his lifestyle. He still drove his old pickup, still wore work boots, still lived on the same little farm. He wanted to know, Mr. Harrison said quietly, who loved him, and who loved his money. My hands trembled. So, they never knew. Mr. Harrison smiled sadly. Not a clue. I remembered every holiday they'd skipped, every birthday they forgot, every excuse they made. I'm busy. I have meetings. I'll visit next month. Next month never came. 6 years. Almost no visits. Meanwhile, every doctor's appointment, every sleepless night, every meal, every hospital stay. I had been there, not because of money, because he was my father. Mr. Harrison reached into his drawer one final time. This is the document your father wanted only you to see. It wasn't the will. It was something else. A handwritten letter. If Daniel or Rebecca challenge the will, read this aloud. I looked up. What's in it? Mr. Harrison smiled. I promised your father I wouldn't tell you. You'll know when the time is right. At exactly 1 o'clock, the entire family gathered in the conference room. Daniel walked in first, confident, smirking. Rebecca followed, already discussing which realtor should sell the farmhouse. Neither of them even looked at me. Daniel whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. Hope Ethan isn't expecting much. Rebecca laughed. He'll probably inherit Dad's toolbox. A few cousins chuckled. I simply folded my hands. Mr. Harrison entered carrying the official will. The room fell silent. He adjusted his glasses, looked around the table, then said 7 words. Your father left very specific instructions. Daniel leaned back confidently. Rebecca smiled. Neither of them realized. The next 10 minutes were about to destroy everything they believed about their father, and everything they believed about me. The conference room was so quiet that I could hear the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Daniel leaned back in his chair with the confidence of a man who had already spent his inheritance. Rebecca was scrolling through luxury home listings on her phone. She wasn't even pretending to listen. Mr. Harrison adjusted his glasses and unfolded the first page. Last will and testament of William Carter. Daniel smiled. This won't take long. Mr. Harrison ignored him. He began reading. To my beloved children, if you are hearing these words, it means I am finally at peace. I ask only one thing. Listen until the very end before making any judgment. Everyone remained silent. Then came the personal gifts. My father's old hunting rifle went to his best friend. His military medals were donated to the local Veterans Museum. His vintage truck was left to the volunteer fire department. Daniel frowned. Can we skip to the financial assets? Mr. Harrison looked directly at him. No. Your father specifically instructed me not to. Daniel rolled his eyes. Rebecca sighed loudly. After another few minutes, Daniel finally snapped. Seriously? We're wasting time over old furniture. Mr. Harrison slowly closed the folder. If you interrupt again, I will end today's meeting exactly as your father instructed. The room immediately fell silent. Then Mr. Harrison reached the final pages. The Carter estate, including all investment accounts, the manufacturing company sale proceeds, the farmhouse, and every remaining financial asset. Daniel leaned forward. Rebecca smiled. I held my breath. Mr. Harrison looked up. Then he read the sentence that changed everything. Leave 100% of my estate to my eldest son, Ethan Carter. Silence. Not a single sound. Rebecca blinked. Daniel laughed. A loud, confident laugh. Good one. No. Seriously. Mr. Harrison calmly placed the document on the table. I am serious. Daniel's smile disappeared. Rebecca stood up so quickly her chair crashed onto the floor. What? That's impossible. Mr. Harrison nodded toward the file. Your father signed this 18 months ago. Witnessed. Notarized. Legally binding. Daniel slammed both hands on the table. He cleaned the house. He manipulated Dad. He stole everything. For the first time, I spoke. No. I loved him. Daniel turned toward me with fury in his eyes. You planned this. I slowly shook my head. If I wanted money, I would have stopped taking care of him years ago. You never even came. Mr. Harrison opened another folder. Your father anticipated this reaction. He pressed a button. A television screen lowered from the ceiling. What is this? Rebecca whispered. A video. Recorded by your father 3 months before his death. The screen came to life. Dad appeared sitting on the farmhouse porch. He looked weak, but his eyes were clear. He smiled softly. If you're watching this, then I'm gone. He looked directly into the camera. Daniel, you once told me you were too busy to visit. I counted. You visited me twice in 6 years. He paused. Rebecca, you promised every Mother's Day that you'd come next weekend. You never did. Rebecca lowered her head. Then Dad smiled. Ethan, you never made promises. You simply showed up. Every day, every appointment, every lonely holiday. Every bad night, you never asked me for $1. His voice cracked. You gave me something my money never could. Time. I felt tears running down my face. Dad looked back into the camera one last time. So if either of you believes Ethan somehow tricked me, let me make this perfectly clear. This was my decision. My reward. And my final lesson. The screen went black. Nobody spoke, not even Daniel. For the first time in his life, he had nothing to say. Then she looked at Rebecca. And every Christmas, your father waited by the window. He always believed you'd come. Rebecca covered her mouth. Tears filled her eyes. Mrs. Jenkins continued. He never complained. He just smiled and said, maybe next weekend. The silence became unbearable. Daniel suddenly pushed his chair back. I don't care. This isn't fair. He was my father too. Mr. Harrison nodded. You're absolutely right. He was. And that's exactly why he gave you 6 years, to prove it. Daniel froze. Mr. Harrison continued. Money wasn't the test. Love was. And unfortunately, you failed. Then Mr. Harrison reached into his briefcase one last time. There is one final instruction. He looked directly at me. Ethan, your father asked me to give this to you only after the will had been read. It was the handwritten letter Dad had mentioned. The one he told me to read only if they challenged his decision. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. The room was completely silent. I began reading aloud. To my children, if you're hearing this letter, then someone believes my decision was unfair. Let me explain something. An inheritance is not payment for being born. It is a thank you for being present. Daniel, I never wanted your money. I wanted one afternoon with my son. Rebecca, I never expected expensive gifts. I only hoped you'd answer my phone calls. Ethan never asked what he would receive after I died. He only asked whether I needed another blanket when I was cold. If you think he received more than you, you're wrong. He earned it long before I ever signed this will. By the time I finished, no one in the room could meet my eyes. Even Daniel stared at the floor. For the first time in years, he looked small, not because he'd lost the money, but because he'd finally seen the man he had become. Mr. Harrison quietly closed the file. The reading of the will is now complete. As everyone slowly stood to leave, Daniel looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. Not anger, not arrogance, desperation. Because for the first time in his life, he needed something from the brother he had spent decades humiliating. No one spoke as the conference room emptied. The confidence that Daniel had walked in with was gone. Rebecca couldn't stop crying. For the first time in years, neither of them looked successful. They looked lost. I picked up my father's letter, thanked Mr. Harrison, and headed toward the parking lot. I had just reached my old pickup truck when I heard someone running behind me. Ethan. I turned around. It was Daniel. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his tie hanging loose. He wasn't the confident businessman anymore. He looked like a frightened little brother. Can we talk? I nodded. For a minute. He took a deep breath. I know you're angry. I'm not. He looked surprised. You should be. I shrugged. Dad didn't raise me that way. Daniel stared at the ground. I made mistakes. I waited. I was selfish. Another pause. I thought there would always be more time. His voice cracked. I didn't think he'd die so soon. For the first time in decades, I believed he was telling the truth. 2 days later, my phone rang again. This time it was Rebecca. She sounded nothing like the woman who had mocked me at the funeral. Ethan. I don't know how to say this. You don't have to. She started crying. My husband left. I stayed silent. He borrowed millions for risky real estate projects. I didn't even know. When everyone learned Dad left us nothing, the banks called. They froze everything. My husband packed his suitcase this morning. He said he couldn't deal with the pressure. I closed my eyes. The woman who once laughed at my old truck was now sitting alone in a nearly empty mansion. Daniel and Rebecca arrived expecting another lecture. Instead, I placed 3 folders on the table. Daniel frowned. What's this? The first folder, I said, contains enough money to pay off your debts. His eyes widened. The second, I said to Rebecca, creates a college fund for your grandchildren. She burst into tears. And the third, I smiled. Isn't money. Daniel opened it. Inside was a handwritten agreement. 1 condition. Every Sunday, lunch at the farmhouse. No business.no phones.no excuses. Family first. Daniel looked up. That's all. I nodded. Dad waited 6 years. I'm asking for 1 afternoon each week. Rebecca couldn't stop crying. Daniel quietly signed the paper. So did she. A year later, the farmhouse felt alive again. Children laughed in the yard. Rebecca cooked Mom's old recipes. Daniel learned how to fix fences with me. We argued. We laughed. We remembered Dad. Not because we had to, because we wanted to. 1 Sunday afternoon, Daniel looked around the table. You know, Dad still won. I smiled. Yeah, he did. Because in the end, the greatest revenge wasn't watching my family lose everything. It was giving them one last chance to become the family my father had always hoped we'd be. And every time we gathered around that old wooden table, I could almost hear Dad's voice drifting across the porch. Now that's the inheritance I wanted you to keep.